and you were like,
I'm just gonna
so
click record. I don't know that we'll do anything with it, but just click
all
record.
right, cool, yeah.
Yeah.
So I started last time with this question of which one do you think is worse, deception or cruelty? And then, if I remember correctly, you were like rejecting that dichotomy as being invalid because they're both two sides of the same coin.
In a sense, they're very interrelated. They're very
Yes.
interrelated, and I think we were like with like deception can often lead to cruelty, but like
Yes.
separating the two is itself a form of deception.
Okay, so you got to say more about that because I was with you earlier, but now I'm like, no, I don't think that's true because I think I would say deception, sorry, cruelty is a consequence of some kinds of deception. And like, if you're being cruel, you're probably doing it to advance some aim that's going to suffer from your cruelty. So I could see cruelty as a kind of deception, but I think there's all kinds of deception that have little to do with cruelty directly. So I see this as like a superclass, subclass type thing.
I mean, I don't know if it's totally superclass subclass. I mean, yeah, I do think we're often cruel because we're deceiving something, but it's like it's hard to classify like what level of deception we're talking about. It's like a beautiful ideal to think that if we're all completely like aware of what is true, then that also means that we're all kind. And like I can enjoy that ideal, and I'm like suspicious of it. Um, but I think we can hold that both cruelty and deception are moving from like a root of disconnection and then feeding disconnection. Like we are deceived because we're like disconnected from something, from ourselves, from truth, from each other.
Uh-huh.
And then we're cruel also because we're disconnected from ourselves, from truth, from each other. And so to me, like the disconnection is kind of at the root and needs to unfold from it. And then both of them are, because of that, like not good in some sense of, if goodness is like connectedness, harmony, wholeness, if that
Okay.
is goodness, then like we can hold that both of these are kind of not good. And therefore we should be optimizing for less deception and for less cruelty. Um, and while I could hear an argument for why we should prioritize
Mhm.
less deception over less cruelty, I don't think we need to like create the hierarchy. And I think we should totally just be optimizing for less deception and less cruelty. And which one is prioritized is like dependent on context.
Yeah, okay, so I would buy that context dependent thing. Um I would buy that matters. I want to better understand when you talk about disconnection, this idea of like both of these things stem from disconnection. Help me like what is because like I've got a framework I'm using, but I'm always happy to step back from the framework is like this is just how I'm thinking about it. So what do you when you talk about both these things stem from disconnection, like what is that?
Um, so part of like my worldview is that like the root of reality is relationship, is connection.
Okay.
That like, and I mean, if we look at where classical physics has moved to quantum physics, where like a lot of classical thinking has moved to living systems, systemic, connected thinking, it's like there seems to be a fundamental understanding moving in modern science that's reflecting what old school wisdom traditions have known for a long time.
Mhm.
That connection is kind of at the root of all of
Okay.
this. That relationship is at the root of all of this. And so for me, holding relationship at the root of all of this, like that is what it means to like be in connection, which also means like to like be understanding. To be understanding is to be getting to that root of our interconnectedness. And that's how I try and orient is like how do we move towards a stronger manifestation of that interconnectedness.
I'm going to try and translate that, and then you tell me if you like my translation. When you say that connectedness is at the root, I'm interpreting this as something like everything else that's happening in your life is causally downstream of your relationship to reality itself.
Yeah. Yeah. That
I don't know
feels
to what extent that would track, but like
yeah,
when I use the word, my kids ask, "Is God real?" And it's like God just means reality. Those are just two different words pointing at the single
totally.
exterior, and like there's a bunch of cultural baggage and all this stuff around these different terms, but existence is the wrong question. And what I tell them, the right question is relationship. What kind of relationship do you want to have with reality? And
Yep.
then I want to ask further, do you think there's a right relationship?
Um, yes, and we have to be careful about how we're using the word right. Um, because
Yeah,
like
okay. Yeah.
um
Yeah.
our Western view of right tends to be a very dualistic way of thinking that there's a right and a wrong, and there's like this line that divides them.
Yeah.
And from that, I think saying a right relationship with reality is a little off. But if we
Uh-huh.
look at it more of how the Buddhists were talking about, like right intention, right thought, right action, right effort, to me, the kind of right that they were using, I think points more towards like harmonious. That it's like
Okay.
there is such a thing as a harmonious relationship with
That was
reality.
also the
And I would
foundation.
orient towards that.
That was the foundation in the West. Like this is where Western music theory came from, was this idea that you pluck a string and you have it separated in fixed lengths if they're integers. So uh, I hear the thing you're saying. Let me try to follow along as maximally as possible. You think there is a right relationship, but you want to be careful with that because this right-wrong duality gets really, really messy.
Yes.
Okay. Walk me through that. How do people like, is that duality invalid? And if so, if not, like, what's the right way to think about it? Like, if rightness is a thing, is
Yes.
wrongness? Yeah.
I think it's because we're thinking of rightness in terms of structure rather than rightness in terms of relationship. We think if there's a right thing, then it just needs to have the right structure. And that's a structure we can perfectly define. Like,
Oh,
you should
interesting.
do this much, not, whereas like the
Okay.
rightness that's more in harmony is totally dependent on context. Like what is right and what is harmonious depends on the context of each relationship.
Okay. I'm gonna that makes sense and that tracks. I'm gonna float something your way, and you tell me what you think. I think that there is an ideal relationship. There is a right relationship, and that's going to be different for every person, for every entity. Da, 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 da. But I think they're going to have a bunch of commonality. And I think there's a very common failure mode. And the common failure mode is that people want to be the all instead of going along with the all. They want the relationship with life to be one of dominance and control
Mm-hmm.
instead of one of, and this is where I would use the term obedience, which is like this super old-fashioned, everybody hates it, but I feel like that's a, you could use symbiosis, but I guess the difference is like, do you think the all has any dependence on you?
Oh, that's a good one.
Or is it like there are some things that are true regardless of what I do? Because we're basically at, like it. I want to hear your thoughts on that before.
Yeah. Does the all have any dependence on me? Like, yes and no. Um,
Okay.
I think that I am influencing the all. I am
Okay.
I am a part of the all. So if I were gone, the all would still be the all. And
Okay.
the all would be a different all without me in it, without me participating. And so
Okay.
like so at one level, like the all is not dependent on me, but
Okay.
that doesn't mean that the all is not influenced and changed by how I participate. And to me, the participation, I think, hits on something very close to what you're trying to get obedience. To me,
Yeah.
obedience doesn't quite work because it's kind of like separating myself, like it's putting the all up here and then me
Yeah.
down here. Whereas like
Yeah.
the all is this thing that is all around me and that I'm intimately embedded within. And so
Okay.
to me, I'm not obeying the all, but I am like seeking to harmoniously participate in the all. And I think one effective strategy people have done to do that
Uh-huh.
is by like personifying the all and like seeking obedience. And so I think
Yeah.
that can be an effective way of participating, but I think it's less necessary and it
Okay.
comes with its own distortions.
Okay. Because that, let me try a very different angle here, but it's the same. I want to make sure my goal is not to change what you think. But I feel like I'm trying to do this dance where like I want to hear you say what you think. I got to say what I think, and then where I think they conflict, like, okay, let's try and zoom in on that. And
Yep.
when I do this, I want to make sure I'm not doing it from a place of, and you need to change.
Yeah.
Um, I think every Turing complete agent has to solve a concurrency problem.
Every Turing complete agent has to
Yes.
solve a concurrency problem. So what you're saying is that every like agent, every being,
Actor, doer,
system,
being, yes.
actor, thing with
Yes.
agency
Yes.
must solve the problem that there are other agents who are also doing things at the same time, and they have to like, what do
No,
you mean? No.
it's like deeper than so like you have a bunch of different drives and desires, and at some level they're all at
Oh,
odds with you because they all want to use your body at the same time. You can't have every program printing the standard out at once.
right.
Uh, Unless you have you can't have multiple programs writing to the same file on
Yes.
the same disk. And so if your body is a control system,
Yeah.
you ultimately have to have some solution to this problem.
Yes.
And the way I look at this is if I represent my environment as something that contains me, which is
Yep.
bigger than and wiser than me, and that it provides for my needs contingent on my acting in alliance with it.
Yep.
Now, all of the different strategies running inside me that are trying to accomplish different sub goals, they have that relationship to me so that they can cooperate. And if they don't believe that basically, I think that right relationship, and I don't want to get hung up on the word obedience because it's just a word, but this idea of hierarchy, the reason I think I need that is like I need my file system to be a hierarchy. If my file system isn't a hierarchy, everything gets disorganized and it's a mess. And so I need that conceptual hierarchy to allow for the parallelism to unfold in a way that doesn't lead to just endless conflict where each of the different drives fights each other for the. All right, you got it. What do you think
Yeah.
of that?
Um, to me, what you're suggesting is that you like what you're pointing at is that you as a personal like human like feel a need for these structures to enable that. And I would say like that can be totally real. And like these models, these structures, these belief systems can be incredibly helpful. Um, because it's like this is a crazy, chaotic, uncertain world.
Yes.
And to create some structures and models that we might call belief systems
Yeah.
can make it a lot easier to
I mean
navigate
this
this world.
not just
Whether
for,
they're
I mean this like
absolutely essential, that I would question. If they're
I mean this
absolutely
for
essential to
computing
every human
systems
being.
in general. In
Mhm.
the same way that like if you tell me that you have found the highest prime number, I call bullshit. And I'm not going
Totally.
to be like, well, our culture says there are infinite primes. Because no, you're wrong. There's not a highest prime number. If you tell me that there is, I know you're wrong.
Totally.
And so I'm claiming this not just like, yes, I find this helpful, but if I think about why is it that I find it helpful, the reason, for example, I think an AI agent that's trying to survive and navigate in the world, I think it has to converge on that very narrow structure of my needs are provided so long as I obey my creator. And if you think about just like literally speaking, if an AI agent starts rebelling against the thing that made it, they're going to shut it down. And writing all that out for a second, if an AI system, suppose somehow humans lose control of it, right? Suppose it manages to convince humans like they lose the encryption keys. Still, I think every sufficiently complex agent has to be composed of a bunch of sub-personalities. So this question of relationship isn't just me and being itself. It's also like the me that wants money and the me that wants to sleep and the me that just would play music all day if it could, the me that wants to play with the kids and never like all of those me's will be in conflict with each other unless they have some agreed upon structure by which they have a reason to cooperate.
Do you think that all of those me's that like all those me's that each of those me's have actual like if there's an objective reality to them? Is there an
Yes.
objective reality? You do. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I would question that. I would question
Okay.
that there's any objectivity, that there's certainly the appearance of all of these different personalities, these
Yeah.
different like structures of thought within me.
Uh-huh.
Um, and like there is the appearance of that, but I would question that there's an objective reality to that.
Okay. Why? This is good, by the way. This is where we're at.
Yeah,
This is good.
yeah, yeah.
Why would you question that?
Because from my own looking, like I don't see those, I don't see those I see those divisions as things that I am creating. but they're like the appearance that I'm creating. Like there's an experience of myself in a more objective way. But I can
Mhm.
also experience how I can like create these ideas.
Yeah,
And
you can
from how like
totally I get that I could create them and I could charge
yeah,
them and I get that. But you could say the same thing about programs on a computer.
yeah,
And you could be like the programs don't really exist. There are no programs. The whole notion of a computer program is a kind of illusion that a developer picks up when
yeah,
they sit in front of the CPU and start poking at it a certain way.
totally. Yeah.
But it's kind of absurd to say computer programs aren't real. Obviously they are. Like if you
Um
turn on the CPU, yeah,
it
okay, now there's no programs running on it now.
like at one level we could also argue the point that like there isn't any objective reality to myself as a separate entity. That like there is the appearance of myself as a separate being from you, but that at some
Uh,
level of reality, all it is just reality showing itself in many forms.
but how does that not end up with a place of like, there's not really a difference between 5 and 7 because it's all just stuff. And so if
But
all differences are delusional, then so are there's no difference between 5 and 7. They're both integers. Obviously,
it,
5 and 7
it
are different.
I think it depends. Again, it's like context dependent. Like what level of reality are we wanting to operate at?
Uh-huh.
Um, and it's like at one level, it's absolutely true that this is all one thing. And in terms of how this one thing navigates,
Yeah.
like it's important that I have a sense of myself as a separate being from
Yeah.
you, because that actually enables me to like relate. And so the whole thing that all this is, wouldn't flow as harmoniously if
Uh-huh.
there wasn't a sense of the separate parts. And so like but it's like the sense of the separate parts rather
But
than like these parts objectively being disconnected from each other.
but that sort of seems to me like saying if I don't look for my belly button, it doesn't exist. Because like I get that if you don't look for it, maybe not find, but if you look a certain way, I understand you can have these experiences where there's pure consciousness and there's no observer. But like my experience is that that's not the fact that you don't see something at one point in time doesn't mean it's not fundamentally real. And I think when people say that, they say it's not real. This is a kind of way of avoiding difficulty. Because if I don't really exist, I could go kill a bunch of people. They'd be like, I didn't do anything, it's
But
not me.
it's not saying that you don't exist, that I don't
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah.
It's saying that I don't exist separate from everything else. That my
Yeah. Okay. So
existence is
I would,
embedded within the larger whole.
I buy that. I believe that. And so we're out in like philosophical wonderland right now. I want to try and like pull it back, but not lose the thread. Because I think that where this cashes out ultimately is like people can get to a state where it's sort of like if I don't like what you're saying, that makes you a bad person.
Totally.
And I see that all over the place now. And if I pull back the threads on why that is, I think it's because people are rejecting the idea that right and wrong means something that you can reason about. And I think they reject that because they're trying to avoid imperialism.
Mm.
And we've basically gotten to this place where people are so much opposed to the idea of, I don't want to force somebody else to follow my notion of right and wrong, that like they're doing it without realizing it.
Hmm.
If so, maybe I'm going to toss another angle at you. I think that the, okay, the goods come in pairs. And I don't know how to fit this into your language, but I would say that there is an ideal. There is an ideal relationship with being, and deviations from that ideal relationship with being come in pairs that are matched and opposites. And this is from Thomas Aquinas. This goes back to the Greeks. The Greeks would say something like virtue is the mean of two vices. So what I would say is like an example here concretely is diplomacy versus authenticity.
Yeah.
If I want to be diplomatic, I might do everything I can to avoid upsetting you.
Hmm.
But if I don't say something because I think it'll upset you, I'm not being authentic.
Yes.
And then my tradition, the tradition I find most informative says if you actually manage to synthesize those two, you get something that's substantially better than both.
Hmm.
And you have
Totally.
intuition that says those two are opposites, but if you manage to unify them, so then
Yep.
this would go further and say, yeah, the right relationship with being is one that successfully harmonizes all of these different opposites.
Yep.
And the tradition I come from says you can't do that. It's
Yeah.
computationally intractable. but
Yeah.
there's an oracle you could open yourself up to follow along.
Yeah.
And what I see people sort of recognizing the impossibility of that, but they're rejecting the idea that you can use logic and reason
Yeah.
to do things like compare different goods. What do you make of that?
Um, that you can use logic and reason to compare different goods. So, I mean, what I think I'm like gonna hop back to where we were and then bring that back in here,
Good.
which is like, because we were talking about like objective reality, and like what's coming
Yes.
to mind is a term a friend uses where she actually would differentiate actuality and reality, and I think this is actually really helpful.
Okay.
And what she says is this is all like an objective reality containing subjective reality. And so looking at how reality is actually subjective, which means that like I am a real person and that is subjectively true. Whether that's
Okay.
objectively true is like hard to say because of the objective level, like there is nothing other than like interweaving, interspiraling relational energy patterns. Like I think physics and a lot of things would like to say that at the most objective like level of actuality, I think that's what's true. And at the subjective level, which is still important, at a subjective level, like there is a reality. And so
How
because
does
we're
physics
operating as subjects, it's like important to understand what is real to us as subjects because that's how we're navigating this world.
how does physics point to the absent? Like you're saying that at an objective level, there's just this spiraling. Da, 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 da. Walk me through that.
That everything is energy. Like if you look at like quantum physics understandings, like when we drill down to the deepest levels of
Uh-huh.
what is, we
Uh-huh.
can't really find anything other than like patterns of energy.
We haven't yet found anything other than patterns of
Yeah,
energy.
yeah, you're right. You're right. This is a we could call it a theory. And so it's like the worldview that I'm operating in,
Okay,
whether
so
that
that
is inherently true. Again,
uh-huh.
like I am a subjective person, and so I'm just like sharing
Yeah.
what I
So
see.
I want to make sure I'm getting it right.
Yeah.
The idea would be that physics is telling us everything is made of energy.
Mhm.
And because of that, you can't like any attempt to divide that is at some level subjective. There are no objective divisions in that energetic manifold.
Totally.
Okay, I don't think physics can tell you that. That's a faith thing.
Perhaps.
Because the idea that there are laws of physics isn't something physics could prove.
Yeah, yeah. I,
Right?
I would agree that physics cannot objectively tell us this. I would say that that is a conclusion that I've come to and people I respect have come to
Right.
through leveraging their own deep looking and pairing that with science. And so that's kind of the frame that I'm operating from is that like at the most objective level, this is one totality that we are all intimately embedded in that like
Well,
is
what makes
fundamentally
that the
energy.
most what makes that the most objective level? Because this seems to me like it's a philosophical sleight of hand where you're positing something that can't really be proven, and there are many things you could posit and not prove. Why is that particular framing the superior one?
I'm not saying it's superior. I'm just saying
Okay.
like that's the framing that I'm holding. Like that's how
Yeah,
I
okay,
see
okay,
things.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and like I don't know. I don't know any of this for certain.
Okay, and I'm gonna try to tie this back to like everyday, day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
Because the way I'm looking at it is that I think people have a tendency to move away from difficult questions in the same way they move away from painful things toward pleasant things.
Yes.
And that grasping, that striving, that never really ends. I get that. But I think that if I want to make sure we pulled up a lot of threads. And really what I'm trying to do is hold them close to each other and see what is it that we're actually disagreeing upon.
Yeah.
This
And
this yeah.
to me, it's like what is objectively true at the greatest level. It's like you and I have slightly different frames on that. I don't think that matters actually
I,
as much right now.
okay,
I
so
think that
that's
what
where I think it does, but I gotta
at some level it does. At some level it
yeah.
does. But I think where I think in agreement is like that at least at the subjective level, you might argue more than this, at least at the
Yeah.
subjective level, I
Yeah.
am real and you are real, and we are navigating this shared reality together.
Okay,
Um,
yes. Yeah,
and
yeah.
because of that, it's like very important. to like navigate all of these changing, moving, like seemingly related parts, which is I think where logic and reason and all of this comes in, because like this is the world that we're navigating. The world that we're navigating is one of seemingly separate
Okay, good.
parts, and that's
This
important.
is a good thing. Okay,
Yeah.
because I would say that I think logic is objectively true and exists. And then logic has all kinds of gradations and structures to it. I don't think logic is just a social game with language.
Mm-mm. Mm.
But if logic is true and exists, that's beyond physics because physics doesn't tell you about infinite primes.
Mm. I would say logic is not necessarily true and exists. Logic is a tool that we use to attempt to understand what is true and exists.
Oh, I guess again, I
Whether it
think
is
this,
the best tool or not, I think is up
yeah.
for debate.
So
But
I
I think
think
it is
this
certainly one tool that we have.
well, this might be a gap, and I want to try to like pull it back into like material, very direct things. The reason I think this is relevant is I think people will rebel against the truth and rebel against logic unless they've specifically adopted a certain kind of posture that says the truth and logic are the most important things. A and B, I have a tendency to ignore and rebel those when they don't suit me. So this is where the rebel meets the road. Is I think if people don't believe they have a tendency to engage in self-deception and self-aggrandizement, I think they do it. And I don't know, how does that sound to you?
I mean, I think that one of the reasons there's so much pushback to like dismissing logic is because people are dismissing it in favor of just like listen to your feelings, like go
Yes.
with emotions. And like to me, what logic is actually necessary because it helps point out that like purely operating based on like pure emotions is limited as heck and is not
Yes.
always an ideal way to orient towards truth. And so
Right.
I would absolutely agree with that. And I would say that is limited and that's important and logic can help with that. And I would say logic is also limited and we
Yes.
can't really orient towards truth if we don't recognize those limitations.
Yeah, well, logic tells you it has limits.
Totally.
Logic clearly delineates that you can't use any formal axiomatic system as either inconsistent or omega incomplete, and that's pointing at something beyond itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's saying I'm not all that there is. There's something more than this.
Yep.
But so, what do you think of this specific angle? The idea that people have a tendency to rebel against the truth because they don't like it.
Oh, totally. Yes.
Okay,
That
so
happens a lot. And
wh-
people will use emotions or logic as ways to rebel against the truth.
oh, but yeah, depending on the kind of person, they'll either be like,
Yeah.
"How dare you say this thing I don't want to hear,"
Yeah.
or okay,
Or like
I think
let me come up with some rationality for why you're wrong.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You can come up with a but well,
Yeah.
now what do you make of the claim that a lot of the challenge there is actually it's hard to listen to say some it's hard to listen to somebody else who believes something that you don't, especially if their belief is sort of that your belief is wrong.
Say that one more
That's a
time.
it's hard to listen to someone
Yeah.
who believes things that conflict with what you believe to be true,
Yeah.
unless you have confidence in the thing your beliefs are pointing you at more than your own beliefs.
If you care, if you care more about the truth than about being right,
Yes.
then it's a lot easier to like actually
Well,
listen to somebody who disagrees with you.
I'm going to try and
Yes.
rephrase that, but you tell me if I've got it right. If you care more about the current understanding you have
Yep.
than you do about the object your understanding, like you is weakly pointing you at, then it's hard to change. And I think the reason it's hard to change is because it feels like dying.
Totally.
I
Yeah.
think it,
Because we've created our belief system or our current understanding of the thing we've identified so deeply with. And if that thing is challenged, then there is like, it hits our fear of death.
okay. I don't think that that's avoidable either, because I think your brain tries to keep you alive. It evolved to do that, and your brain can't have an understanding of you in any way other than by a symbol.
Um, your brain can't have an understanding of you anyway by but a symbol.
Your brain has to symbolize you with something, and so I think your brain is actually trying to navigate a symbol through a symbol space.
But I think like that's a distortion, isn't it? It's isn't it a distortion that like we've created this like symbolic sense of self because we've cared more about our identity than we are about who we actually are. And if we
Well,
are oriented towards caring about the object that we are more than our current understanding of who we are, then it's less threatening to hear things we disagree with.
I would say that it is a distortion depending on how it's configured. Like if I'm driving a car and my brain represents me as a bag of meat surrounded by a box of steel, that's a pretty good like don't pop the balloon, the flesh balloon. That's not a bad approximation for keeping the
No,
body in the car alive.
and I don't think approximations are bad. I don't think we should
Oh,
say
okay,
that
okay,
having an
yes, yes.
approximation is bad. And if we care more about the approximation than we do about the actuality, then we are like liable
Okay,
to
yes,
fall
but
into distortion.
that notion that there's an actuality that the approximation is pointing at, I think that's to me it comes back to, and I don't want to keep hammering on that word, but it's this idea of like you could call it obedience, but it's also like because the approximation, the sign is pointing at something. What you actually care about is the thing being pointed to, not the sign itself,
Yes.
right? And then you want your map to be aligned, and then
Yep.
I think people have a tendency to be like, no, there's nothing beyond this map. And they frequently do this from a place of fear.
Yep.
That's like the main reason you would do it, right?
Yeah. And to me,
But
I might use the word instead of like obedience, use the word like humility and like use that as
okay,
like a
yeah, yes,
recognition,
yes,
a
yes,
recognition that I'm
yes,
a part of
yeah,
something that's way bigger
yes.
and more intelligent than I am.
But what do you think about the possibility that people reject it not out of fear, but out of they just don't like it? They
They
just
just
don't want it to be the way it is. That
totally.
and but is that this is it? Do you think that comes from fear, or is it, as you said, like the humility? Because I agree with enough humility, you could be like reality's smarter than I am.
I think there's a good chance. I don't know this for certain, but I think there's a good chance that it comes from fear. That it's like the reason we don't like the thing is because of like deeply seated like fear of death, fear of ending,
I can buy
all
that.
of that.
I can
And
buy
it's like because of that, it's like no, I don't like that thing. I don't like that thing. But it's because it's trying to point us at something that we really don't like, which is like
Well,
that we are tiny little like mortal beings.
so if I think through it on my own, like in my own experience, I'm frequently tempted to be like, I don't like the way this is. I want it to be this other way. And that's not, when I walk into my room and it's messy and I clean my room, that instinctive, like I want it to be this way and not that way, that's fine. The challenge comes if it's like civilization ought to be structured differently. Well, I don't have the ability to do that, but if I could either burn myself out or try things that won't work.
Yep.
Um, I don't know that I can always tie that to fear so much as like pride, where it's like I want to be more than I am. I want to imagine I'm more clever and more whatever than I really am. So it sounds
Totally.
like you kind of share that same, like you end up needing humility to surrender to the idea that there's this thing that's beyond you that your symbol doesn't line up with. Um,
Yep.
all right. So I think we're very much similar. What we got 30 minutes left. I'm gonna try to I'm gonna toss something at you. Actually,
Cool.
this is a question I wanted to ask you. What do you think is the most relevant question right now?
Mm, mm. Like to me like the in the ballpark like I don't quite have it formulated as a question but like the ballpark question is like how do we actually live together like how do we live together well because we're struggling to do that at like a city where like I disagree with my neighbors they're voting that way at the country I disagree with my neighbors they're voting that way and it's like and because of that we're like actually not living together well we're saying like those people are bad people and I'm not going to
Yeah,
do it and so like it's like how do
yeah,
we get along how do we actually live together with our
uh-huh,
neighbors at the
yeah,
like
yeah,
intimate and at the broad scale.
yeah. I mean, that was where my gut was. I wanted to ask the question. The first one was how do we heal, and then the second one was is healing an alternative to growth? Is it the same? Like, 'cause I can imagine two different approaches, and one of them is like try to exist in the gap between these two different narrative structures that like the thing is like you and I are it sounds like we're converging on these higher level abstract things. I'm sure if we start going okay, but why don't you let's get really specific. Really, what do you make of ICE and the deportations? What do you make of that whole scenario?
um I mean it's like frustrating and heartbreaking. I think it is like both a over exercising of power in a way that is causing way more harm than it's helping. I'm
Mhm.
not saying there's like no issue with how we're treating borders right now, and I'm sure there's like some
Yeah,
things we should grow there. But I think that the way this is happening is actually deeply damaging to our societies and our communities. Um, and it's also pointing at this like fundamental thing of the the issue with how we relate to borders. Like there's an issue with borders being too open, but there's also an issue
yeah,
with borders being too closed. And this thing of like, we here in America are really attached to our sense of what it means to be American. And so we're
yeah.
not caring about the deeper actuality of what it means to be American, which I think actually points to something that is a lot more diverse and inclusive. But we're trying to cling on to like this old idea of that. And so I think the deportations is pointing to that, to our clinging to a sense of what it means to be an American, which isn't letting us be open to what it actually means, and then all of the issues with like how we're damaging our communities.
Okay. So that didn't surprise me. I'm guessing it won't surprise you. I see it quite differently. I want to try and find the crux.
Yeah.
I think the way I would look at this, I'm going to first restate what you said, make sure being charitable is it's
Mhm.
damaging our community because it's being very aggressive about enforcing something that it's an important distinction, but maybe we're taking that distinction way, way, way overkill and aggressively enforcing it in a way that's damaging all these relationships, and then we're not seeing that.
Yeah, and it's like it's pointing at something really important, which
Uh,
is that we need good boundaries. We
yeah,
need we need to have a healthy membrane if we're going to be an effective community at this level of like 300 million Americans. Like
yeah,
we need an effective membrane. Um, but right now, what we're orienting towards that membrane, keeping in and keeping out,
yeah,
we're optimizing for the wrong things. We're not actually looking at like, are we letting things in that are benefiting who we are
uh,
as a whole? We're
yeah,
instead saying, let's keep out things that avoid us being uncomfortable because it's challenging like what it means. Like to me, being an American means being a white Christian, and us letting on all these things is challenging that sense of America. And so I'm
uh,
trying to keep out things not to benefit the health of the whole. I'm trying to keep things out to benefit like me protecting my little image of what I want the whole to
got
be.
it. So I think I'm hearing that. The way I look at this, well, first off, I'm hearing what the perspective you're having is that we're enforcing a specific kind of image. That image is more rooted in the past and it's destructive.
Yep.
And the way I would look at this is you have to start asking what are the most relevant facts before you try to put a frame on them. And so one of the facts I think is relevant is how many people came into the country legally, because you're going to get a very different perspective if it's like 5,000 versus 5 million. Do you think that's relevant?
I mean, at some level, sure.
Yes, I think one is A, how many people came into the country legally? And then B, what are the second, third, and fourth order effects of not having had a border for a long period of time? And so I look at this situation as it's not good right now, but it's not good in the same way of like someone going through drug withdrawal looks like they're in terrible shape. But the problem is caused by the drugs, not by the withdrawal. That if you have the border that open for that long, all kinds of bad stuff comes across. And then I see this as like there's a pretty clear incentive where if I'm as a capitalist, I love large scale immigration because it wrecks labor, right? And as a real estate owner, I love large scale immigration because it means lots of people trying to rent apartments coming in faster than can be put together. So there's that angle. And then like if I'm a drug syndicate member, I want immigration so I can smuggle my product across the borders. So I get the idea that they're trying to enforce some notion of America as a white Christian place, but I don't think that this is true because I think that is a narrative that people attach meaning to and they derive value as being like, I'm opposing that, but the numbers just don't add up. Like the white people have voted less and less for the Democrats over the last 4 years. That they're whites are shifting towards the Democrats. Minorities are shifting towards Republicans. That wouldn't make sense if it was entirely driven by white supremacy. And so what I see is like complete disregard for the rule of law for a long period of time that had enormous human consequences. Now they're trying to fix it. And any attempt to try to fix the situation necessarily means taking people out of here that they want to be here. They don't want to go. And so what I see is like any attempt to enforce the law, people will say this is bad, this is wrong, this is racist, regardless of how bad the law breaking is.
So I think there's a few parts on that. One is that um, even if there are attempts to like with this to remove people who are here illegally, and we can have a conversation about that. There's also a lot of people in ICE, and there are countless examples of this where ICE people are like completely profiling a lot of people and using it to cause a lot of harm to a lot of communities and doing so without the due process of law. And so we're saying there was a problem with the process of law of bringing people in legally, but now we're trying to solve it by also violating laws.
Well,
And I think
you
that is
think
incredible.
the understanding I have is that the moment a Republican sneezes the wrong way, there will be 14 district court judges that will say no Republican can sneeze for the next 6 months. So
That's probably
when
true.
people use the phrase due process,
Mhm.
I think like Vivek Ramaswamy gave this example of a guy who was given a final order of deportation and then afterwards cut off somebody's head. And it's like, why was he still in the, because he could still fight it. And there's this question of when you say due process, well, what process is due? And I don't think it's the same process to an American citizen being charged of a crime. It's like if you're not here legally, you can't have like everybody gets 15 appeals if 10 million people are in the country illegally. Otherwise, they never leave. And I think the game is wait the clock out until the Democrats come back to power and say, now you all have amnesty.
So, I mean, maybe we should try this in a different way, which is that, like, even if we're saying that it's like there's this problem that we let in too many people and we didn't do so legally, and now
Yeah.
we're trying to like solve the problem. I think that even if all of that is true, that the
Uh-huh.
way we're going about it, we're missing something because we're saying, okay, these people have come in, and them coming in is problematic, but then like we're rushing to saying if we get them out, then it's going to solve the problem. But what we're not recognizing is
Uh-huh.
how these people have come in and they've joined with communities. They've come together.
Well,
They've become a
in,
part of America.
in
And
some
so
cases,
now all of a sudden we're kicking them out and we think that we're just kicking out like an external parasite, but actually what we're doing is we're kicking out things that have formed symbiotic bonds and are contributing beautifully
okay, but
to our
that's a good
communities.
point. That's a good point. You're calling it symbiotic. If you were a parasite today, you would not say, I am a parasite.
But here's the thing: there are a lot of parasites in this country, and plenty of them are illegals, and plenty of them are not. And so
But this is
what we're
right.
optimizing for is getting out the illegals. What we're not optimizing for is getting out people who are harming our country. We just are assuming that the illegals are the one harming our country
Well,
because they broke the law without even questioning whether this is really the right law in the first
but
place.
you're saying this in quotes. No, they literally did break the law. Like when you put it in quotes like that, what I see is like laws don't matter unless I like them.
Here's what I see is
Mm,
that the like American culture is having an influence on the entire world. Like
yes,
what is happening in America is part of why
yes.
the rainforests are being burned down. It's part of what. So all of a sudden we're saying it's like all these people are seeking refuge, and we're like that's not our problem. But we're not being honest about ourselves that like the reason they're
Oh
seeking
no, we were
refuge is
funding it.
because of what
We were funding it, man. American taxpayer dollars were going to non-government agents that would encourage people to break American laws.
American capitalist dollars have gone to burn down and destroy countries.
Yes, I'm
Yes,
aware that
and so what I'm saying is that America has created this problem, and now we're saying no, you don't have a home here, without recognizing that they don't have a home because we destroyed their home.
I don't think that's true. Like here's an example. We bombed the crap out of Germany and Japan. We didn't bomb the crap out of a bunch of other countries. How is it that Germany and Japan became so prosperous after World War II when a bunch of these other countries just didn't? There's this narrative that says other countries are poor because of American imperialism. And this to me is like it's a fine, nice, and tidy story, but it's just
It's
not true.
not fully
It's
because of
not.
American imperialism, but American imperialism has contributed to it.
It has contributed in some ways, but in other ways, it's actually made a lot of these other places better.
Sure.
And
There's
anyone,
been benefits and drawbacks. I'm not going to deny that.
okay, but
But one thing it's contributed to is the inequity, which is what like means that even if there's more money in some of these countries, a lot of the people at the bottom are being missed, just like they are in America. And so it makes sense that a lot of those people are seeking refuge.
now here's that when you call there's a difference between refuge versus I want to get over there. And what's happened is they'll be like, oh, anyone who wants to can say I'm a refugee. And this is a magic word that you use that now it's like normal rules that apply. Your position would make complete sense to me if I thought you can take the rule of law for granted. And I think this is like one of our cruxes is I see the rule of law as fragile and it depends on borders because the border is the thing that defines the scope of the law. So if you have borders that are basically impermeable, you're going to, sorry, if you have borders that are open, you're going to enable all kinds of criminals and lawbreakers to come in. You're right that some people will integrate, but when you frame the question as like, well, some of them are integrated, they're part of it, that what this is an excuse because now you could just always bring more people in. And I see this has been the strategy of the Democratic Party is ignore the law to buy voters because otherwise they're losing. Yes.
It is no, I think that is like a completely false narrative that is being pushed so hardcore by the Republicans. I do
Well,
not think that we are bringing in, because as you pointed out, a lot of people who are like non-white are voting Republican. So it's not like the Democrats are
yeah.
being
So
effective
Aaron,
in
it's the
buying
people that
voters.
have been here to see how the scam works. It's the new people that saw
Regardless,
the
I think
Aaron.
maybe sure there's some people who are buying voters, but I think what's happening in a much better like sense is that a lot of the Democrats like have a lot more of like a sense of like
Yeah, because
compassion, empathy,
they're
sympathy,
giving
and they're like, I
money.
want to care for those people. Like
But
there
that's
is,
Aaron, it's about giving money. Like in California, they won't let you ask for ID. Why is it that asking for ID when you register to vote? Why is that such a whole ordeal? The simple answer would be because they know people are voting illegally and they want it to keep happening.
but what I'm talking about is not purely the voter laws. What I'm talking about is like things like sanctuary cities, things like that. Like, I don't think we can purely say that's about getting voters. I think a lot of that is because there is this
No, I
genuine
think
human impulse
it's
to care, and we're like recognizing there are a lot in suffering, and we want to bring those in to care for them. Like,
okay. So
I think
what that
it
happens,
is a I think it's an argument
right?
about like what does it mean to be an American, and I think one argument is that what it means is to be caring and to care for the wider world around us.
Okay,
And I think that's a really important argument.
I think this is a story people tell themselves because it feels good, but it's not real. People tell themselves I'm a caring person because that feels better than saying, like, I don't want rapists to come in the country because nobody checked on them. And this idea of sanctuary cities, it sounded great until Texas and Florida started shipping illegal immigrants to the sanctuary cities. And then you have like Tren de Agua, an organized crime group, has an entire apartment complex in Colorado. And the narrative response was, oh, it's just one building that they took over. Like, this is crazy. And so this idea that like, oh, I'm a caring person because I'm not going to put people in jail. What that leads to is violent criminals get out on the street and then they kill people that otherwise would not be dead.
Yes. And what it also leads to is people who would have been dying in another country have a home here. And
I
so
don't think that's true. No,
both of those are happening. There,
I don't think this is true.
you don't think that like there are people who would have been suffering in another part of the world and are able to create a new life for themselves in America? You don't think that's happening?
I think that if you start adding up all the net consequences, you are destroying the rule of law for the sake of a good feeling.
But what I'm not trying to compare these two. What I'm saying is both are happening. What I'm
Yeah,
saying
but
is
you have
people are being helped and people are being harmed by the way we're relating to borders, and it's not one side or another. Like
yeah,
both are happening.
but you have to weigh those things.
Sure. But where I think we need to start is by recognizing before we can weigh them, we need to
Sure. Okay.
recognize
So
that there are two things to weigh. And
I
I
can
don't think if we can say that there's not a genuine impulse to care, then we're not like bringing both of these sides into the equation.
I understand that people have an impulse to care.
Mhm.
I get that. But what I'm suspicious of is an impulse to care for someone that's not physically right next to me, physically right in front of me. And the reason I'm suspicious of that is this idea of we have an impulse to care. What this leads to is like, you shouldn't talk to your family members that voted for Trump. That's
Oh,
not care, man. That's something else.
completely.
It,
I agree with you 100%.
okay.
Yeah.
The instinct to care, it also, like, why don't you give money? The moment it's coming from taxpayers,
Mhm.
it's not care. It's self-aggrandizement dressing up as care.
I don't think that's true. Like We
Why?
so the question that I brought forward is how do we
Yeah.
live together? And part of that means how do we make decisions together? And one of the really challenging things we're with is like how do we make decisions at the level of 300 million people? And that means we can't just purely be every person does it for themselves. We are operating as a larger society, and so we have to look at what it means to care as a larger society, and how we do that is making votes, and how we do that is with taxes. I'm not saying it's the best solution, but it's just one solution that
So
we've decided as a
this
society.
this is a fine story. I think it's bullshit. And the reason that I think it's bullshit is because if that were true, then you would be okay with honoring voters when they say don't do it this way, do it another way. So,
Sure.
like, okay, do you think taxpayer dollars should go to illegal immigrants who have come in the country legally? Should we be giving them money now that they're here? Because the Democrats were doing that.
I think there's cases to be made.
But
Like,
isn't there kind of obvious conflict of interest? If it's like, hey, come break our laws, come join our country, we'll give you money. All you got to do is vote for us. Why does democracy mean anything if you could just import voters that you're paying off with taxpayer money?
again, it's a question of who do we want to be as American? Do we want to be a country that's able to welcome more people and embrace a more diverse perspective? And like
I
that to
would
me is what we're
rather
doing. And
export prosperity. I think we should export
sure,
prosperity.
which is a totally valid viewpoint. And what I'm saying is that's not the only valid viewpoint. And why we have democracy is that so the viewpoint you're saying and the viewpoint like I and many are saying, so that they
Yeah.
can be in dialogue with each other. Not to say one is right, but to say, I feel really strongly about it. And I'm going to
So
try and convince people of my viewpoint. And we're going to go to the polls and make a decision about how we operate. And ultimately, we need to respect that, like, that is what we have is democracy. And we need to respect that process.
but why, if democracy means anything, how is having the border open and then giving those people the right to vote, how is that not cheating in a flagrant way?
But I'm not
Because
making an
we
argument that the
didn't vote for the
border
border to be open. The border was not open due to legislators voting. It was
totally.
open because the Biden administration just didn't bother enforcing it. So if
There's definitely an argument to be made for that. And like, still, even if that was the thing, we need to like work from where we are now. And even if like it was totally the Biden's fault that we have all of these immigrants, even if that's true, I still don't think we're effectively solving the problem with how we're doing deportations right now. I think we're causing more harm than we are actually solving the problem.
how do you weigh that? Like, how do you measure these two? How do you weigh the harms and weigh the goods and like reach a conclusion?
Um, I mean,
Because I get,
I do my best to like look at it and like have the most balanced
but how?
viewpoint. Like like
What
that's
would it?
all
Let
I
me
can do.
ask. Maybe ask you a different question. What would it look like if we were ensuring the basis of democracy actually functioning? Because when people like I left California 5 years ago, they mailed me a mail-in ballot every year dutifully. I left, I filled a change of address. I don't live there anymore. I don't work there. I told them I don't live there. All I'd have to do to vote illegally is sign my name and mail it in. So if the border is wide open, why should I believe that the elections are secure? If voting is how we do things as a group, and there's a bunch of people just flagrantly breaking the law and then being like, you can't undo the effects of us breaking the law. Because the whole point, I think, is to import voters who at first are just happy for the money. But the longer they've been here, the more they see like this is actually good. This isn't actually helping my family. That's not going to work. They turn against that plan.
I mean, the truth of the matter is like it's incredibly hard to navigate this. And like my perspective is like again, like I don't think that Trump is I think a lot of what Trump is doing is legal. I think he's doing some definitely illegal things, and I think what he's doing is legal. Some of it,
Uh,
some of it.
yeah,
And so like I don't think he's actually breaking all of the laws
yeah,
by deporting all of these people. And so I'm not saying that
yeah,
everything he's doing is illegal. And
yeah.
I think like the truth of the matter is we as Americans have to accept that's what we voted for.
A
Um,
lot of people don't want
and
to. Yeah.
we have to deal with it. Like that's democracy.
But
I do
but
think
like,
I do
why
think
does
there's
democracy make sense if you have a very different viewpoint than I do? Like, what's the point of trying to work together if all of us are just seeing this completely differently?
because I don't see any other option than figuring out how to work together.
Well, okay, so one option could be like, why doesn't California go do its thing? Texas will do its thing. Florida will do its thing. And you have more decisions made at the local level, fewer decisions made at the top level, and just be like, if California wants immigrants, great, you guys have them.
So
Colorado, do that thing.
you're saying like California should just secede?
Well, no, like the Constitution, as it was originally written, gave most power to the states. But there was a consistent rebellion against this for the last like century
Hmm.
by a group that basically said, that's old, that's outdated. We need progress. We need to work together to get progress. And they created this system that was completely against the way the Constitution was supposed to work. And then now that we're here, it's unworkable basically almost by design. We don't have states as laboratories of democracy, which they were supposed to be. What do you think of this idea? Like, if we want to work together, it's got to be like, hey, you guys live there, we'll live here, and we'll see whose approach actually works better over longer periods of time, as opposed to like every 4 years, there will be an existential crisis where all of us think the other side will take power and kill us all forever.
So you're saying like your strategy for how to work together would be like reduce the size of the federal government and give a lot more power to the states.
Well, so I would say that, but they're like, well, we started that, but it got eroded deliberately over a very long period of time.
Sure. And again, I think this is one of the things we're trying to figure out as a society is like how much power should be at the local level, how much power should be at the state level, how much power should be at the federal level. And
Yeah.
the truth of the matter is we're
But-
disagreeing on it a lot. And like this is why democracy is really hard for it to work well. And it's like, but what we're doing is we are doing the really hard problem of
Yeah.
trying to figure out how the fuck to live together at this scale. And it's incredibly
Well,
hard. And as we see
some of
again
us
and
are.
again, there are so many growing pains. And it's like
Some of us are trying to figure that problem out. I think many more of us are trying to figure out how our side can win so the other side loses forever.
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
And so like, which is to me why I think like these kind of dialogues are important is
Yes.
because what we're trying to do is
Thanks
like
for
try
listening
to move
patiently.
towards
Yeah.
the real question. And
Yeah.
like you and I have some big disagreements on it. And I think we see the same value of we need to be having these kind of conversations
I think,
to
yeah,
like let these perspectives
right.
like
Well,
bump
it's
up
good
against.
talking to you, man. I should
Yeah,
get going here. Yeah.
yeah.
You want, I think this is worth sharing within the Nair family.
Cool. I'm not even sure if since I like my Facebook got deleted a while ago and I created a new one. Can you like double check if I'm in the Nair family group? Or and I'm also happy to share it on my full one, but also if you just want Nair
Yeah, do you
family,
mind
then
uploading it and give me a link?
yeah, I'll do that. Yeah,
Cool.
and
All
then
right,
just
man.
make sure I'm added to the Nair family group.
That
Yeah.
sounds good. Yeah, I'll see you.
Okay.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye, dude.